What's going on, guys? Today I'll be cutting some custom tint and applying it to my headlights. Alright guys, so today I'm planning to do some custom tinting to my headlights. So if you haven't seen, I'll put a link in the description for when I actually built this headlight setup. So these are actually two Hella 500 rally lights on each side. So I use the outers as my main low beam, and then I use the inners as my high beam. They're really just pointed differently. These are pointed a little bit more at the ground, and these are pointed a little bit further down the road. It actually works out really well. I can see great with this setup. It actually turned out a lot better than I thought it was going to. So I've decided I want to change the look a little bit. I think these lights look cool, but I think they're a little bit too much in your face. They're a little too bright. It kind of matches the car. I think it looks good from some angles, and I don't like it from some other angles. So what I want to do is actually tint the headlights. So I'm not planning to tint the entire headlight. I'm planning to just tint this inner portion and actually leave an outer ring a little bit silver. So it'll give it that look of like a halo light. It's not really a halo light, but when they're off, it should give that effect of kind of a halo around it. And I did do a quick Photoshop on this, and I really like the way it looks. So in order to do this, I bought some tint, and I'm gonna actually try to cut it out on my vinyl cutter. So I'm first gonna take my headlights off so I can work with everything inside. It's gonna be a lot easier to work with them off the car, and also it's very cold in the garage. When you're working with tint, it's kind of better to not be in freezing temperatures. So I'm gonna take these off, get them inside, and then I'll start looking at how I can cut out the circles for the perfect size to fit in here with my vinyl cutter. I've now got my headlights off the car, and I'm getting ready to cut the tint. So what I'm going to try to do is use my vinyl cutter. I use my vinyl cutter to cut, stickers. I can cut heat transfer vinyl to put on shirts and things like that. I've never tried to cut tint before, but I'm gonna give it a go. So I did measure the tint, and it seems like it's pretty close to the same thickness as the vinyl, so I think this is gonna work. But what I'm gonna do first is do some test cuts so I don't waste too much of the tint. So I'm just gonna make a circle here, a pretty small circle, and I'm just gonna use this to see if I have the settings correct for the vinyl cutter. The machine I have is the Silhouette Cameo 3, and this is Silhouette Studio that comes with the machine. So this has worked pretty well for me for cutting vinyl and the heat transfer vinyl. So I've got my circle there, so now I'm gonna go over to the send, and this is where you set it up as to how exactly it's gonna cut. So for the first go, I'm gonna just leave all the settings where I have them for cutting the regular vinyl and just see what happens. You can set things like the tool depth, this is the cutter depth, the speed, and how much force it uses. So now I just need to load the tint into the machine and see if this cuts out the circle correctly, and if it does, we can move on to cut out the real shapes. So on the first run, you can see it did score the tint, but it did not go the whole way through. So when I pull it up, it doesn't leave the circle behind. So it didn't cut quite enough. So now what I'll do is I'll increase the depth of the cut a little bit and do a circle here and see if it's enough. I just increased the depth by 1 step and now it went through perfectly. And it didn't go too far through. You can see it didn't cut through the actual backing, but it cut through the tint perfectly. If you by chance have the same setup and want to do this yourself, I ended up going to a 2 depth of cut here. I used the speed 5 and the force on 7. So now what I can do is actually save this as a profile, and I'll just save this as a tint profile, so then if I ever need to use this again in the future, I already have it all in place. So now that I know I have the settings correct, I can now lay out the 4 different circles that I need to cut for the lights. And I decided the size I want to go with is 5.55 inches. So I can easily set all of those dimensions inside this program. I've now got the tint applied to all the lights. It was a pretty simple process. I just put 4 pieces of tape around the light, top, bottom, right, and left. So that was enough to give me an idea that I had the tint pretty much centered as I applied it. I was a little nervous with trying to get everything centered and applied, but the tint had some thickness to it, so that made it a little easier to work with. So if you did like put it down too soon, or if you needed to peel it back up a little bit, it wasn't an issue. So then once I got it placed where I wanted, I just kind of worked it in from the center out to get it applied to avoid any bubbles. I didn't have any issue with air pockets or bubbles. Then lastly, I just heated it up a little bit. They say you should heat it up so that it conforms to the shape. There's not that much shape on these lights. There's a little bit of a curve, so I just heated it up a little bit. So my initial reaction is I'm pretty pleased with how it looks. As you can see, I still have that kind of halo ring around the outside and the darker inside. I'm thinking I could have maybe gone a little bit darker. I could always do a second coat of tint on top of it to get it even darker than it is. After going out and holding up the headlights to the car, I decided that this 1 coat of tint wasn't quite enough. It wasn't quite dark enough for the look that I was going for. So I went ahead and I started to apply a second coat of tint. This is the only one I did so far. I just did my best to line up the second layer of tint with the first layer, and it actually worked out pretty well. So now I'm going to go ahead and do that on the other 3, and then I'll finally get them back on the car.